character of Nan Lin, who is Ivy's mother, was developed, really a lot of it was based on my parents' love story. So not that their personalities are similar to my parents, but my parents met when they were also very young. They had known each other since they were, adolescents, and they'd fallen in love a little bit after high school, I think. And my dad would always tell me the story of how he always knew that my mom was going to be the woman that he would marry. And my mom at the time also, she saw him as a younger brother. She's a little bit older than he is. And it wasn't until they grew up that she fell in love with him. And so that backstory and the backdrop of falling in love in a small village and having their parents kind of be opposed to it, I don't think my grandmother, my dad's side, approved of my mom at first. So it really was inspired by my parents' love story. But the character of Ming Wu, who is the love interest in Nan's life who passes away, he's entirely fictional. And I really just kind of weaved the different aspects of Nan's love life because I wanted it to inform Ivy. I wanted Ivy to draw a lot of conclusions from how her mother didn't end up with the man that she really loved. And that would inspire Ivy to really pursue Gideon with everything because she didn't want to end up like her mother. And then later on in the story, so I always knew that that was not going to be the real version of Nan's story because Ivy hears about all this from her grandmother. And I had always intended to loop Nan's story back at the end. And Ivy would hear the real version from her own mom. And that would really inform her decisions later on toward the end of the book because that's when she would have the epiphany, oh, my mom and I are not that different. I'm sure we all have this epiphany as adults, like we're just like our parents, even though we don't want to be. So I wanted Ivy to understand that and understand that actually they're quite similar. They're both very determined and ambitious, and they've also done really bad things. And as messed up as it might be to say, that is actually Ivy's, that becomes the impetus for why she does some of the things that she does later on in the book. The entire idea of transcending class, I think, is really fascinating to me because of my background as an immigrant in the US. My parents came from so little, and this is such a common universal story for Chinese American immigrants, and I'm sure so many immigrants in the US. My parents always tell me stories when they were young about my mom would get one new shirt during the Chinese New Year, and she would wear that shirt for the rest of the year, and she was so diligent about washing it, keeping it clean. They go on and on still about the taste of an egg at New Year's because it was such a rare thing. And I think I included that detail actually in my book, which is just how wonderful and amazing and how much people coveted just a really good scrambled egg with rice. Hunger was universal. I mean, there was never enough to eat really. And people worked really hard. And so those were the stories I grew up hearing. And my parents, when they came to America, we lived in a lot of apartments, and I remember my parents buying their first house, and that was it. That was really when they felt like they'd achieved their American dream. And ever since then, they've been slowly upgrading the size of their house, and now they live in a massive house that I'm almost embarrassed by because it's the two of them. Me and my brother moved out, but when we go back, we think, why do you need all this space? Why do you need all these bedrooms? The upkeep must be so hard. My mom always complains about how long it takes you to do the cleaning. But to them, that's really what they want. They wanted to reach that sense of security and to have the big home. And I would say there's no better example of people who have transcended class than my parents. In terms of what they've lost, I think it's possible to become, to go from a really humble place to have money, but I think they've kept everything intact, their values, because they did it for their children, and they did it for their parents, and they did it for their family. So I think a lot of social climbing stories, I think of the classic ones like Edith Wharton, even in my book, White Ivy, it's really entertaining because these characters are really ambitious for themselves. They want a better life because they want to buy pretty things, or they want to marry into a wealthy family so they can have an easy time. But my parents' generation, that was not the goal. They never thought they would have an easy time once they became wealthy. For them, it was to always have enough money to send their kids to college and to buy their kids a home so their kids can have an easy life. And so I feel like the motivation for transcending class wasn't on their own behalf. And I think that's what made them so determined and strong. I really, if I wanted to be rich, I don't think I would have that determination for myself. Like really, it would be, why am I trying so hard? Life is fine. It's good enough. But My Chinese American friends and their parents, it was the same thing. All of them worked so hard for their kids and also for their extended family. So during the scene of Ivy's wedding day, where Sylvia comes in, and Sylvia's one of Ivy's bridesmaids, and Ivy has just learned something very shocking about Gideon, and Ivy confronts Sylvia. She says, did you manipulate me into falling in love with Gideon? Did you, essentially encourage me so much to distract me from realizing the truth on my own? And in that moment, Sylvia's reaction, I worked on it. I worked on a few iterations of her reaction, but I always knew that Sylvia was going to be frank with Ivy the best way she can. I don't think she was going to ever say anything that would implicate herself, because she's such a careful and astute person. She would never say, oh yeah, I did that, I knew the whole time, because then Ivy could use that against her, or Ivy could, tell Gideon. That's what Sylvia said. But essentially, in the best way she could, Sylvia acknowledges that Ivy is correct. And to me, the culmination of Sylvia's thoughts was when she says, you and Gideon are perfect for each other. I wasn't lying to you. You want somebody who is idealized and perfect, and so does Gideon. And the two of you will never show each other your truest selves. Both of you guys will kind of perform this fake, act of marriage and this, really idealized version of yourselves, and you will never let your guards drop around each other forever. And she said, that's really, I think she said, that's really heroic. She said it's really rare. Anyone can do it for a day, a month, but how many people can do it forever? And she said, Gideon can do it forever. And to me, that was really the culmination of Sylvia's thoughts. I really think she believed that the entire time. I don't think she thought of Ivy, as, a sucker, or she thought Ivy is just this girl she's stringing along. I really do think she understood who Gideon was, but she also really understood who Ivy was, and she thought, this is a win-win for both of them, so why not try to get them together?